Welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is Interviews from Quito, the program where we explore the big challenges that Ecuador and the region are facing. In today's program, we analyze the coverage in media of the COVID-19 pandemic in Ecuador. How has the local and international media reported on this issue, and how the government of Ecuador has rejected, saying they're all fake news. For that, we have journalist Denisse Herrera with us. Thank you, Denisse, for joining us.
Thank you, Carla.
So first, let's look at how local media covered the pandemic in Ecuador.
I think that to talk about what happened in Ecuador, I think that it's important to say here that most of the international media outlets reported what were happening here. So I think that the Ecuadorian media, I don't know if I can say it in that way, but probably they want to show what happened in Ecuador. At the first time, it was very difficult to believe that people were dying at their homes in the hospital. At the moment, we know that Guayaquil is facing a really difficult moment, and the authorities are saying that most of that information was part of a fake news campaign. And we should remember that at the beginning of this pandemic in Ecuador, we have at that moment first a health minister, Catalina Andramuño, who resigned in the middle of a pandemic situation. So we can see that the media outlet, I think that after 2 months, that we'll be in around 2 months of the emergency declared by President Lenin Moreno, but I think that now the media outlets are saying what is really happening in Ecuador. At the beginning of this pandemic in the country, it was very difficult to find information, and I think that that was the reason that people in Guayaquil started to show what happened in that city by social media. So I think that now probably we can say that the Ecuadorian local media outlet probably are showing what is happening here.
So would you say it was a matter of censorship on the part of the media, but not specifically on the government, but each reporter not being able to say what was really happening?
I think that we know that Moreno did some agreements, probably with most of the main media here. So I think that at the beginning of this at the beginning of this pandemic, I think that most of the media were like in agreement with Moreno. I think that it was an agreement. I mean, they were following the official information. And at the beginning, we all believed that the number of the deaths, the number of the cases were true. But now we can see that that is not the truth. We know that people died in Guayaquil, and we know that is more than what the government is saying now. The last report, according to the authorities, Ecuador has around more than 30 cases of COVID-19 in the country. But after what the government is starting to say that after the announcement made by the citizens, and after that, social media started to, the local media started to say what was happening there.
But how would you describe the use of information through the government? Because we had several press conferences every day through digital media also. How was that managed? Because we saw, for example, that the civil registry in Guayaquil reported close to 10,000 deaths in less than a month in Guayaquil. And the government was saying that in the entire country for the past 2 months, only less than 1,000 people had died.
Yeah, I think that it's important also to remember that Moreno, at the beginning of this pandemic in Ecuador, said that it was important that he wanted to protect himself, so he stayed at the government palace. So I think that was the first problem of this pandemic in Ecuador, when we don't know which authorities actually are leading this pandemic in the country. I mean, Moreno are saying that he is the president of Ecuador and he is taking all the decision about this pandemic. We supposed to think that probably they are taking all the decisions. But I think that that is one big problem because we see the Minister of Government, Maria Paula Romo, leading most of the press conference, the virtual press conference. After that, we see another authority, and we don't know which authority is the responsible of the information that came from the government. So it's very difficult to know if they are planning this campaign to say that most of the information is true, or is like they really don't know what is happening in Ecuador. I mean, they are not thinking in all the complaints that citizens are making at the, in the middle of this emergency.
So would you say that Ecuadorian media and Ecuadorian journalists really confronted these figures, really had the opportunity to speak in a press conference, had the opportunity to say, well, this is not what the rest of the country is dealing with?
Yeah, I think that they don't want to do that. I mean, I think that probably we are talking now after 2 months of what is happening in Ecuador. And at the beginning, as I was saying, I think that it was very difficult to talk with authorities. In the middle of this COVID-19 situation, I think that probably the journalists of Ecuador didn't talk with Moreno. We don't have the opportunity to talk in a virtual press conference. We don't have the opportunity to talk in a WhatsApp group. Well, I think that the government, President Lenin Moreno, just gave his message, and the information came from the top authority of Ecuador. So the virtual press conference, you have the chance now to ask some questions to the authorities, but you don't have the time. I mean, the authorities are also saying that they don't have the time to answer all the questions that came from the journalists. I think that the role of the people who, I think that the international media have a really important role here.
And how would you describe the coverage that international media did on Ecuador?
I think we can see, I mean, most of the reports made from Ecuador about the COVID-19 situation. We saw images about what happened in Guayaquil. We saw the bodies. We saw people crying, asking for the body of their relatives, and that was and is very sad because the government said that most of that complaints were part of a fake news, trying to stop the reality. I think that the authorities just tried to stop what was happening in Guayaquil, but they didn't think in the impact that now we are facing if the authorities were taking, I don't know, another ways to face this pandemic in Ecuador. So I think that most of the international media, including Telesur, made part of to publish what was happening in Guayaquil.
And how did the coverage from local media changed after reports by CNN, by Reuters, Al Jazeera, that were here in the country reporting on what was really happening? Did it change somehow?
I think that it is changing. I mean, I think that it's now, I think probably it's late. I hear, and I'm talking with most of the people who are suffering in Guayaquil, who are asking for help. They are trying to find the body of one relative, and they are really sad, but they are really worried because they can't believe anymore in the government and the journalists, because at the beginning of this pandemic, when they were actually made this complaint, they didn't receive any help. I mean, the journalists tried at the beginning of this pandemic to also, it was difficult to believe that this tragedy was happening in Guayaquil. So I think that now they are, I don't know, probably they don't trust in anybody.
Probably. And you were mentioning your experience talking to families and relatives in Guayaquil. Can you share with us a bit of how you handled this, how you reported on what was happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to I don't know, to talk about a history so sad. I mean, they are really suffering the COVID-19 impact. I think that in Ecuador we didn't have the real imagine about what could happen. I mean, at the beginning, what we hear about people who died in the streets, who asked for help, and they didn't receive any government help. I think that it was really difficult to believe what happened in Ecuador. And now, when we read something related to the COVID situation in Ecuador, or we saw some history in our country, I think that for now we don't really know what is happening. I don't know if you understand me. Mm-hmm. I think that is very difficult to understand what these people have to face at the moment of the most impact of this pandemic in Ecuador.
And what would you say, apart from the health aspect of the pandemic, of the crisis? Of course, we need protective equipment, we need hospitals to take care of people, but what other things are people being affected by? The economy, social issues, education?
I think that obviously the economic situation is one of the main points here, and we know the reforms that actually the National Assembly is discussing. And one of the claims about that was that the government is not thinking in all Ecuadorian rights. I mean, we know that most of the, the middle of the population in Guayaquil is not part of the official workers. So they have to go to the streets, they have to work for each day because they don't have to eat. So we have to understand that this pandemic in Ecuador was and is really difficult to face because we don't have all the resources to face that. I mean, we saw and we see each day how the government is only thinking in their interests. So if these kind of complaints are still existing, is because the government is not thinking all the responsible of this situation in Ecuador. And we hear in international public reports about the situation of Ecuador, and we are one of the most affected countries in the region. So it's very important to take action now because people died because of these resolutions.
And there are some issues that reporters might not be reporting at the moment. For example, Ecuador continues to have issues with austerity programs imposed by the IMF in Ecuador. Those were the main issues before the pandemic hit us. How are journalists covering those issues, the austerity programs, the proposals to have remove subsidies in Ecuador? Are those topics still being debated in the media?
Yeah, we should remember that Moreno, when he started his presidency, he made a lot of changes in the way to control the country. I mean, he changed his interest. So he started to follow new agreements, and one of them was with the IMF. So if we hear and we know, if we hear about the complaints made by the health sector, we know that the doctors, nurses denounced in the middle of this pandemic that they didn't receive any medical equipment, that most of the doctors who have died in Guayaquil City died because they didn't have all the medical staff to face this situation. So we know that the cuts made in the most of the public sectors made after these agreements. And we are seeing now this with the latest mobilizations of the students outside the Central University in Quito, who denounced that they are rejecting these cuts. They are rejecting that the government minister of Ecuador, Maria Paula Romo, confirmed in a virtual press conference that the government will make these cuts because they don't have money. And it was a really difficult decision. I know. I mean, the economic situation in Ecuador is complicated. It's complicated, but I don't know if it's an option to make these kind of cuts in the public in the main public sectors as the medical sector and the education. So we saw how the students in the recent days took to the streets and were denouncing this kind of, for them, this kind of wrong decisions came from the government. So I think that is very difficult to debate, to still debating what is what is happening in Ecuador, because we know also that most of the assembly members are rejecting most of the reforms made by the government. So this reform, I don't know when they will have a decision. We know that most of these economic reforms are asking some special contribution from the citizens, and now the citizens don't have money, so it's very difficult to take to decide something like that, and you didn't made any I don't know statistics if the people are in favor or no about this situation and these decisions.
Especially since due to the pandemic, most businesses cannot open unless you're part of the health system or media.
And that was one of the points also here that the government started to say that it's moment to reopen some activities. And most of the local authorities were saying that Ecuador is not ready to reopen activities because we are facing a really difficult moment. Guayaquil is still the epicenter of this pandemic in Ecuador. And we hear each day that people don't have to eat, don't have any help, and their relatives are still missing. They don't know how to face this this health crisis, and now they have to think if they have to reopen an activity, some commercial activity, but they are asking to other. They are facing other situation. I don't know if the people in Guayaquil are ready to start to the new reality.
Indeed. And so all of this, of course, leaves many lessons for journalists in Ecuador. What do you think those lessons are? How is it going to change the profession?
I think that is very, I don't know, I think that all the journalists who have to go to the streets to make the histories and to, I don't know, to discover all this new situation, probably in the future will be a good moment. I mean, I think that is an opportunity to take new actions, to take the journalists as something real. I mean, to reopen some ways to find some kind of different histories. And I think that Guayaquil was one of these opportunities. I mean, you have all that histories that you have to respect, because all that people that have died, that are facing a difficult moment, was important to tell to all the people, to all the world, that Ecuador have a really good citizens. I mean, it was very difficult to say if your life were in danger, and if you are exposing too much to follow your profession. But I think that we have a new opportunity, and I think that is a good moment. Most of the people who are facing this, all the world facing this pandemic. So I think this is a new opportunity for all to find new ways to face that, to face this moment, and to find another way to follow the journalism. I mean, it was very difficult to show this kind of situation, but I think that is a really good moment. I don't know, for the journalists, we had to care us. I mean, we had to take all the biosecurity measures. Is a new challenge also, but we have to follow that and to continue with our careers.
And how will it change, do you think it will change the relationship between the government and media and reporters? Because it's also a lesson for them that reporters in Ecuador were not trying to destabilize the government by reporting what was happening. They were trying to make it seem that people know what's going on in the world. How would it change how the government sees media, and will they learn that reporters don't want to hurt the government, they want to report?
Yeah, I think that the decision of Moreno to stay at the palace of the government is one of the big mistakes that he made, because I think that we all, the Ecuadorian and all the journalists, wanted to interview the president. I mean, we don't have the opportunity to talk with the president and to know what's happening in Ecuador. So I think that it's impossible that the relationship between the government and journalists change. I mean, all the citizens know what happened in Ecuador, what is happening now, and most of the citizens are also criticizing the decisions of the government. We know that the number given by the authorities in relation with the COVID-19 situation, the cases at the moment, I don't know, probably in the first month, most of these cases were denounced, and we don't have the real numbers. So the government have the opportunity to face this situation, I think, to respond to all the citizens in a very good way, but they didn't care about the health system, they didn't care about the education system, and they didn't care what happened in the future with the country. So I think that is a new moment between the government and the journalists, and we see now that all the local media probably are trying to taking, I don't know if calling like that a bunch. I mean, probably, but if you go to the streets and the people are saying to you, you are not saying the truth. Obviously, you will go to your work, and you will evaluate if you are making a really good job. So I think that the journalists now have to say the truth, because people are claiming that.
Indeed. And I don't want to continue or end this interview without asking you about the cases of journalists that have died during COVID-19. We saw a lot of reports by international media of if it was compared with other countries, we had some of the highest numbers of, compared with the population, of course, highest numbers of reporters dying on the field, dying reporting about COVID-19.
Yeah, we know that it was one of the main points here also, that the numbers. We have, I mean, we just have the official number given by the authorities in relation with the COVID cases and the deaths and all the people in the context of the COVID-19. We have to know that the number of the COVID-19 journalists infected and the medical sectors have their own numbers. So I think that independent media outlet like in the social media in Ecuador started to follow the cases of the COVID-19 of the COVID-19 situation in relation with the journalists. So I think that in the province of Guayas, the situation was different as the other provinces of the country. So we know, I mean, I know that most of the journalists who have died because of this virus were because this virus became community. So probably they didn't die because of they were in their jobs. I don't know. It was a really difficult moment for the Guayaquil citizens. So I don't know if I know that Ecuador is one of the highest number of journalists who have died because of the virus, but I think that it was because the government didn't take measures at the beginning of this pandemic in the country.
Indeed. So it's a lesson for both the government and reporters in Ecuador.
Yeah, but I think that now we I don't know, probably we don't are able to say that we are ready, but I know that we are understanding what is happening in this moment.
Indeed. Thank you very much for your time, Denisse.
Thank you.
So we've been talking to journalist Denisse Herrera on how media in Ecuador has covered COVID-19 and how the government has reacted when reporters pointed out that they did not act in time to avoid a bigger crisis. Thank you for watching. This is Interviews from Quito. I'm Carla Gonzalez. Until next time.